Iron Fist from the Sea,
Yeah.
which covers the 46 top secret operations, including the sinking of Russian ships.
Okay.
Were you aware that we sank 2 Russian ships? East German ship, Cuban ship, Angolan and Mozambican ships during the border war.
Sure. That's no.
There's the story.
I think I need to brush up on my.
Well,
It's all in there.
that was the first book, the first revelations ever. There's two versions. The one is the history and the other one is the abridged version, which is the one you see there. Below it is the other one.
Okay. And how long did it take you to write those books?
5 years.
5 years.
That one, 2 of us wrote it. It took 5 years for the simple reason that they were all top secret. Not even people in the Navy were aware of it.
Did you have to get some kind of clearance to write the book?
When we started, we were told that the only files left were from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and were held, still classified top secret, and were held by Special Forces. Louise Jooster from the archives, military archives, then said, "We've got nothing, but why don't you write and apply for it?" So she wrote the letter for my friend. He's a very Afrikaans and doesn't. His English is not so hot. In fact, not so warm. He signed it. It went off, and 3 months later he phoned me very excited and said, "You're not going to believe it. The minister has approved the release of the files to the 2 of us by name for a period of 2 years." And when we got the letter of authority, we saw what actually swung it was the Chief of Special Forces of the stage. I'm trying to think who it was, but he was a hell of a nice guy. He was professional, ex-Transkeian. Had written there that he recommends that I'd rather our proud history be written by professionals than appear in the press. Or press media or something to that effect. So for 2 years we had access to all the files, but half the files had been sanitized. Certain operations they'd taken, the file was empty. And those are ones against the ANC. There were 46 operations, but he was a Special Forces operator. In fact, the cover, if you look at the cover of that, the chap in the middle died 6 hours after that picture was taken. The 2 guys, bareheaded guys left and right, were both severely, and in fact we didn't know they'd survive, on board each of our ships. There were 2 of the ships, I was the one in charge. And both survived. The doctor of my doctor on board was Wouter Besson. So that was an operation in which we blew up the oil refinery in Luanda.
Sure, that's quite a way into the story.
If you're interested, I sell the books here cheaper than anywhere else.
Okay.
No, I'm just telling you.
Yeah, I know for sure.
What's the last?
How much are they going for?
250 rand.
Oh, that's a bargain.
Well, in the shops they cost about 350, so it's not much.
That's good to support local content. So perhaps we can start at the beginning. Have you always had a love for the sea and sailing and that kind of thing?
I was born and bred in Kimberley. You can't get much further away from the sea in South Africa because it's the middle of South Africa and distant from the Cape. However, we used to spend holidays at the sea. That was my only introduction to the sea. But as a kid, I joined the Sea Scouts. And that was the start of this love affair. During our camps, 2 of the camps were to Durban and things like that. And in fact, in 1965, my last year in Kimberley, we came down to a camp down here and I saw the Navy properly. And I'd always decided I was going to go into the military. I come from a military background. My father was a fighter pilot in the war. Ended up in the Kimberley Regiment as OC, Infantry Regiment. And so I knew military was going to be my call in life. Navy, in many ways I chose the Navy because I just loved the whole idea of it. Being a Sea Scout, I like boats, rope work, things like that. So at the end of my schooling, I was not balloted. In those days, you got balloted for national service, so I applied to go to the gym. In fact, I even applied to do national service, and they told me, no, it's full. If I pay 10 rand, I can get a rifle and join the commandos. So I came down here, signed on as an AB, and joined the Navy.
Sure. And that was probably in this, and your friends and all that must have thought you were crazy signing up, or did some also them join
no,
the force?
None of my school friends. Some of them were at the gymnasium, but I basically lost contact with most of them.
Exactly. And then moving to Cape Town from Kimberley must have been, was it a bit of a culture shock, or were you straight into your...
No. I think being a scout was used to camping and travelling, etc. I used to spend a lot of time away from my family with my grandfather who had a farm. So it was just it was a move.
Just another adventure.
And it was great. In fact, I only saw my parents a year later when I went home for Christmas. And it was just something. I had a new family.
And the Navy is presumably different than it is now. You managed to get up through the ranks quite quickly. You obviously had a natural aptitude for it?
Not as quickly as some people think. I spent an awful long time as a candidate, or midshipman we call it. In fact, I qualified and I couldn't get my qualifications because I was not yet commissioned. But I was very lucky. I spent a lot of time overseas as a midshipman. I got sent to Argentina and went around the Atlantic on a sailing vessel, a lovely full-rigged ship, the Libertad. So by the time I was commissioned, I had a lot of experience. I'd qualified on board the ship. And then I moved up. I was very lucky in my postings. I got postings normally well ahead of time. As an ensign, I was made second in command of a minesweeper. I felt very sorry for the captain, who was a commander, but it was fantastic. I enjoyed it. I had served in one of the ships before, so I felt I could handle it. I was no faster than most.
And the minesweeper, that must be quite a specific sort of way of sailing and almost dangerous at times.
The big thing about the minesweepers are they're very seamanship orientated. You're working with wires, you're working with equipment, towing equipment, etc. So you've got to know your oats there. And luckily, in my 1966, I served in a minesweeper on the lower deck. And we had one of the most superb minesweeping captains of his day, and we did all sorts of minesweeping. So having experienced it, when I went back and discovered I knew how to take charge of it, I knew the ropes, which was always fantastic. If you have the experience, you're much more credible.
And the keys to being a good leader, I mean, in tight, confined spaces, it must really test you as your leadership skills.
If you're a submariner, yes, but the leadership skills in the Navy are the same almost anywhere. The confinement makes no difference to that. That just keeps your tempers warm, maybe. But leadership comes, the Navy puts you on courses, but you develop it very quickly. The Navy is a fascinating place because there's no comparison to being on a ship. Army people tell me that what was the difference between command at sea and command of a regiment? And I say, well, your parade ground doesn't sink or burst into flames. Being in the Navy, you can't sort of pop into a garage when something goes wrong, etc. So ships of the South African Navy are very, very tight units. We always refer to a ship as a she, and I will tell you, you respect your ship and you love your ship. I mean, when the ship goes to the breakers' yards, it's very sad. And I've just lived through it with Somerset. SAS Somerset, which was cut up in Cape Town recently.
That's almost like one of your children dying. Maybe not quite as heavy, but...
Actually, it's like your family dying.
Yeah. A lot of memories on those ships.
And fantastic memories too. And memories of people.
Yeah.
Because you remember incidents, but the incident is memorable because of what the people do during it.
Exactly. And did the Navy get the gravy and the Army get the stew?
Probably. There's quite a big difference. During my time, I spent some time with the Army. In fact, I'm very proud to say I represented the South African Army in London as the military attaché and the later advisor. But I've always enjoyed the Army. I mean, the Navy was my job, the Army and Air Force were my hobbies. But we lived a different life. We slept in clean bed linen most of the times, unless on submarines, of course, in which you had a sleeping bag and PT shorts, but that was a different type altogether. They are quite different.
And this, in terms of the submarines, when's the first time you had exposure to those?
First submarine I had exposure to was HMS Rorqual, a British submarine which was visiting us in Durban. But South African submarines, in 1972, I was serving in one of our frigates, and we went to fetch SAS Johanna van der Merwe, the third of our submarines. That was in middle 1972, and we escorted it back to South Africa. I decided I wanted to be a submariner at that stage. I had applied, and I tried to use as much opportunity as I could to go across to her during the day, depending on my watchkeeping on board, and did my first dive to 300 meters in the Northern Hemisphere, which was just kind of special for me in a way. And that was it. I thought I would end up there, but I burst my eardrums, and on the doctor's recommendation I withdrew, which sad, but I was with two other captains or future captains on course, and both of them were outstanding, so I don't think I would have made it personally. I'm too active to be patient on a submarine.
And in terms of your book, you talk about some action at sea that people won't know about. When's the first time you saw non-friendly fire, so to speak?
Funny enough, it wasn't in South Africa. It was in Israel in the 70s, middle 70s, 1975. We were sent under very secret conditions to Israel, where we were trained up and stood by the building of our first strike craft. We were very lucky in that we were given, after doing our qualifying course, we were sent to Sharm el-Sheikh, where we were attached to their ships, and some of us were lucky enough to have some, use the word, exciting times, which was quite memorable. But when we came back to South Africa after 2 years, we became involved with the Special Forces, and we took part in some 46 top secret operations. They recorded in the book which you referred to, Iron Fist from the Sea, and it tells you exactly what went on. It includes the sinking of Russian ships, East German ship, Cuban ship, Angolan ship, and a lot more.
And that was all around the border war, sort of, in Angola? That
was between 1978 was the first operation, and the last one is about, if I remember correctly, about 85, 86, 87.
So that must have been quite a hot time to be in the Navy with all of that going on.
It was interesting, but it was not well known in that because of their classification of top secret. It was very much a need-to-know basis. I was in strike craft at the time, and I was the personnel officer, and I'd be told that please don't take any crew off that ship over that period. So I immediately knew that she's going somewhere, but that was it. I had no need to know, and nobody was going to tell me. So they were very, classified, and few people were aware of it.
And who would you be taking your command from then?
We worked under Special Forces. We were attached to Special Forces, but we always had a naval officer, a very competent naval officer, with them, so you always had somebody there who could assist you if you had any queries. But it was necessary once in a while for logistic support. So.
Exactly. And then do people have to read the book to find out what happened?
Well, if you want me to tell you the story, I'll go through them slowly, but it'll take me a few days. There are 46 operations. the ships involved are mainly strike craft and submarines.
Yeah.
But some of our frigates, or frigate, Tafelberg and Protea, also did support in them. And those were operations we couldn't have done without them. So it wasn't just the strike craft and submarines, it was other ships as well.
So there was a kind of a sort of covert war going on at sea then between between South Africa and all those other people?
We were mainly involved in the landing of special forces.
Okay.
So we were responsible, we were battle taxis, you can call us that, battle buses in a way. But it became very interesting. Our main threat was not a naval threat per se, it was an air threat. Operations on the east coast were fairly routine and you just didn't want to be seen. The biggest thing was that one of our major restrictions was we could not be seen or identified. And if we thought we'd been seen, we had to get the hell out. So that was interesting. The threat on the west coast was very much air. The air forces on that side were very competent because Russia was supporting them and Cuban pilots were there as well. And we know that from the transmissions we used to intercept Spanish versus Portuguese. We didn't think the Russians would be flying in operations, but the Cubans could, especially along the coast because that's where the Cuban forces were. They only later got directly involved in the border war. But they had Air Force squadrons and we were very nervous about them. However, the strike craft were absolutely operational. No vessel sailed unless she was declared operational. And that included a 60%, later 65% TTB rate. That guns, it means target triggered burst. In other words, if an aircraft came at you and you fired 10 rounds, 6.5 rounds would explode because of his VT, which is like a radar head or radio head, and we would have taken them out. So we felt very confident, but never wanted to test it. Though the youngsters did, they always thought they'd like to.
And doing these missions, as a seaman, do you ever question what you're doing, or you just follow orders?
Well, the only person of the ship's company that was aware of the entire operation was the captain. All the others were only told east or west, or they saw that, and they just went along. The navigator and the first lieutenant, second in command, would always know where because they had to make sure we were in the right place at the right time. But it was very, very limited. If you know the special forces, they're not the cutthroat people that one imagines. They didn't go in to kill. They went in to do a reconnaissance or sabotage. Killing somebody left evidence. They like to do it so that it was clean. So they avoided it at all counts. And in the book, Iron Fist from the Sea, you will see that they took all steps to avoid confrontation. So I think that made them a lot more acceptable. They were seldom aimed at, and also that one of the orders was if any chance of civilian casualties, you had to stop. So the limitations were very good. They were controlled. I don't think very many felt against their conscience. War is war. In retrospect, one could look back at it and say, oh dear. But we did have, I know, one particular case of PTSD, which was unusual because the Navy were support. The Navy were the taxis.
So you must have was there gunfire going over the head, or was it all very stealthy?
No.
That was the whole point.
We were very successful in that we avoided confrontation. That was the whole aim. The moment there was a gunfire, we were in trouble. Not from the gunfire, but from our bosses back home. And I think if you see what happened when they captured Wouter Besson and killed two of the recce's up in Cabinda, that's what we tried to avoid. That was the one failure, which is covered as well.
Yeah. Exactly. And then in '94 you go from kind of a particular thing to a whole new dispensation. How was that transition for you?
As smooth as a baby's bottom. It was quite interesting because in 1994, before the election, I was posted to the UK as the military and naval attaché to the Court of St James. I was in the UK during the election and everything, and one of the things was that when it came to the actual election, because we were military, we could not be involved in anything, but the ambassador at the time asked the two of us to just keep an eye on the crowds, etc., to give them warning of anything. And it was amazing. There was this feeling of exuberance from everybody, no matter what flag they were carrying or anything. It was just... And I think that from the Navy side, that's what happened as well. When we started introducing, unfortunately, the other forces, none of them, either the ANC, FAPLA, the political side, or the previous states, Botswana, etc., had any naval equipment or power. The ANC, the MK, did have some trained in the Navy, but they had never had practical experience. So they came across, but the Navy went and recruited numbers of people. We'd already started recruiting locally, but then with the integration of forces, we took them and they were trained at Saldanha. And it was a wonderful success story. The Navy does things very well like that. I mean, few people realize that we trained up in the Malawian Navy in the 1970s. And for years, we had wonderful friendship with the ones that had come out here. We could do that.
Exactly.
So I found transition was perfect. Oh, you had the odd cases of people who were unhappy, etc.
Yeah.
But
so it seems like the Navy is very adaptable and it can kind of get through things.
There are a number of reasons for that. One very simple reason is that we are more international than any other service. We exercise with other countries, whereas the Army exercises with other units within themselves. To have an international military exercise is a logistic nightmare. You've got to fly in people from all over. We do them at Luatla. But with the Navy, you just climb on your ship and paddle across to South America, take a submarine with you, and you have a wonderful time. So we understand, we work under international rules. Don't forget, the moment you leave our waters, you're in international waters. So the Navy are more adept. They know other people. They're easier to integrate.
And in terms of the skills development, is it still as strong as ever, bringing the next generation through?
Everyone asked me as the Navy what it used to be. When I joined the Navy, I was told by the people the Navy is not what it used to be. These were World War II veterans and wonderful people. All of them gone now. No, the Navy is not what it used to be, thank God, because times have changed. In my days, we didn't have things like cell phones and a lot of things we didn't have, which have changed the way everything happens today. Technology has changed in leaps and bounds. The Navy has changed, obviously, because if it didn't, we wouldn't be able to function. I had the pleasure recently of visiting one of our new ships built by Damen in Cape Town. They are patrol vessels, and with a few other very senior officers, and I was absolutely amazed because the quality of people on board, their knowledge, but more importantly, their interest. You could see they had the same love of what they were doing and pride in what they were doing. So I think the Navy is still good, just out of interest's sake. Everyone says these ships we can't send to sea, etc. As we're sitting here, 2 of our frigates, that's half of our frigates, are at sea, out in Blue Wonder. Our submarine was out last week. So it's not what people think. Yes, times have changed, but the whole world has changed.
Exactly. Presumably the small strike crafts is exactly what the Navy needs to, is in this modern day age where you've got to be...
Actually, the strike craft per se has seen its time.
Well, I mean, these new Diamond, the new vessels.
Oh, the Diamond vessels.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
They're very capable. They're 600 tons, but they're not much bigger than a strike craft. They're very welcome, but they are inshore patrol vessels. They have got a capability of going further offshore. But what, in my opinion, personal, and I'm a retired person, we need the greater version of that, the offshore patrol vessel. Slightly bigger, capable of going as far as the southernmost point of South Africa, which is not Cape Agulhas. It's actually the Prince Edward Islands. People forget that South Africa extends to the Prince Edward Islands. We don't have the ability to send these little ships, or we can't send these little ships there. So we need less sophisticated ships in the future.
Okay, so and the corvettes, can they make it down there?
Oh yes, they can.
Would you be looking for something a little bit smaller than that, or?
Doesn't have to, size is not the big issue there, though it does make it more comfortable in our seas.
Yeah.
But it's a capability. The corvettes, frigates, call them what you want to, have very sophisticated equipment which requires a lot of maintenance and a lot of what's that. And I don't think we need them as much in this new world as we did some time ago. The problem with the Navy is you've got to plan in advance. You know, people say, why didn't we just get one submarine? Well, if you wanted a second one, you take another 5 years to get it because they don't come off the shelf.
Yeah.
So when you plan a Navy, or when the Navy has decided you've ascertained the threat, you eventually come up with how to meet it. Times change, but you're already in gear. You cannot stop the process, or you can and lose the money. But shipyards work to time. So what you've got to make do, and we can. We can. But
yeah, sorry, carry on.
You've got to have the money for it.
It all comes down to cash.
Cash. The South African Navy is bleeding because of the lack of budget. They get less than 20% of what they should have. And why do I say that? When you buy a new motor car, I bet you have it serviced rigorously every year, according to the thing. We've not been able to do that with our ships. The arms deal gave us ships, gave us the ability, gave us a deterrence factor, which was very big, especially because of the submarines. But it's no use having a new vehicle if you can't use it and maintain it. Only one of our ships has been maintained.
So did we almost go? We went too sophisticated with the arms deal, and should have perhaps gone for something a little more user-friendly.
In retrospect, maybe. I wasn't involved in that.
So they didn't give you...
So I can't say what their mind... But at the moment, if you look at the way the world is developing, we can still work in the third tier, second tier maybe, third tier navies of the world. And with what the ships are, I've got to play a minor point. It's the people, it's the budget, it's the equipment, it's the updating.
Yeah.
You can... Nowadays, we lose a lot of cot. That's stuff bought off the shelf. And you have a system, you have a software, and all of a sudden, internationally, the technology is going at such leaps and bounds, it changes. You've got to go back and update all your stuff. If you don't have the money or the budget for it, you fall behind.
How capable is South Africa for defending itself from sea?
We don't have to at this stage, but ships are not there to defend. I don't believe so. I believe we have a navy to deter. It's much better not to have to fight than to have to fight to win. You win by not fighting. Submarines, people say, why do we have submarines? You know, submarines are not as expensive as people think. They're expensive to acquire, but they're very economic to run in the end, and their deterrence value is magnificent. Because when a submarine goes to sea and disappears under the waves, you don't know where it is. Many years ago, in fact, as we involved in the submarine museum, our guides people used to say to us, why do we want submarines? And we'd point out, and we'd give them an example, which was very much abused in a shame. It's a long story. But we used to explain to people from Limpopo, etc., who'd say, why do we want submarines? Because all the schools used to come down and visit our submarine. And we'd say, if you live in a village and you want to cross the river, and there are crocodiles in the river, how do you cross it? And they say, by boat or by bridge. I say, right. The only way to get to South Africa for a foreign country to threaten us would be to come by what boat? And by boat, in which case we can see them. Submarines, going to force them to come carefully. So it's a great deterrent. And another factor which, to the best of my knowledge, and I'm an anti-submarine warfare officer in the past, I was, the South African Navy submarines, both the Daphnes and the current new modern ones, have never once been detected by a foreign warship in our waters until they reveal themselves.
So deep water still presents quite a bit of stealth for craft then.
Well, it's also the currents around the coast with the layers which reflect the sonar, etc. And also the tactics. So our submarines are a very, very important deterrence. Yes, there's no great threat at the moment, but how fast did the Ukrainian-Russian war?
Exactly.
It occurred very quickly. Ukraine is now buying ships, but they can't get them in there. Their second corvette has just been launched. It's never going to see action because it's not allowed into the Black Sea. So what I'm saying is, if you haven't got it, you can't just get it.
Exactly.
Like that.
I read somewhere or heard from somebody that one of the main reasons we weren't attacked previously during the 70s and the 80s because we had the submarines.
There was I don't remember the full details, but there was a big talk about blockading South Africa. And it was done by an American institute. They worked out the numbers of vessels they would require. They came to the conclusion that it would be impossible to do it without cooperation of the Russians, which in the Cold War was not going to happen. But a blockade is not very easy, and if there's submarines there, you've got to think twice.
And the Americans don't like taking casualties. Well, nobody does.
Well, nobody does. But the Americans, they're more resilient than we think. They take lots of casualties. They don't like it. But
well, not in the last.
They're so involved.
I suppose they are so involved, so it's inevitable that you're going to get.
It's inevitable.
You went over to Israel. That was an interesting experience for you, seeing how that during the ship build, seeing how they operate compared to South Africa and the technology over there at that time.
It was very fascinating. Their technology was already world leading. The ships, our ships and theirs, were the first ever to have digital fire control systems, as opposed to the old analog windy mechanical type stuff. And we learned from them the importance of effectiveness and of having equipment that works.
And over the years, I was reading a lot of the vessels got retrofitted as well.
The Navy has, and in the past we were able to do it, in spite of not being the favourite son. The Army and Air Force during the border war got all the gravy. That's the one time we had beans. But we always made sure our equipment worked, and in the submarine case, our Daphne submarines were upgraded twice with South African equipment. And the last time, a project called Nichols, it was some world-beating technology. And the Submarine Museum, which we're opening again, will reveal that. Amongst the equipment, the South African industry redid our periscopes. And they gave us one of the most magnificent suites. And most of the equipment is South African in the submarine now. But to give you an idea, it was done by a company called El Optro. And when we bought our new submarines, the German submarines, Zeiss asked for the specs that we needed for the periscopes. And apparently we told them, I say apparently because I wasn't involved in this, that they had to meet the ones that we now had. They said, we can't do that. They came out here, witnessed for themselves, and when told who was making them, they went up there, and shortly after that, Zeiss bought shares in the company. They've since sold them to a company called Hensoldt, and they to this day are making periscopes, currently for Chile, I believe, but South Korea, Turkey, Portugal, I think, use these periscopes. A later version of them. But our equipment was superb. South African technology was and still is. I mean, helicopters, South African made radars are fitted on Norwegian frigates.
Are those privately or public companies?
There's a number of companies. Some are Denel, but all over.
And is there still that industry is still chugging along?
It's small, but it's working. Another good example. Saab is another country which is really busy. If you look into South African arms industry, it's been suppressed, partially by government. I'm being actually genuine. Our arms control goes beyond a joke. I mean, while I was in London, certain countries were interested in our Rooivalk helicopter.
Yeah.
But they were told, sorry, because of what you're doing there, you can't have it. I'm talking about big militaries.
So it almost becomes a
I mean, why buy weapons if you're not allowed to use them?
Yeah.
I mean, you either make them to sell, or
you don't make them at all.
Or we made them for ourselves at that stage.
Is there still that ruling that it's very tight what you can sell?
I get the impression that it's, I'm an outsider.
Yeah.
But I get the impression that it's not as easy to get permission for things like that. Which you've got to have tight regulations.
Yeah.
But when you're talking government to government, there should be a bit of laxity.
Especially with ones that are allies.
I'm not quite sure who allies are anymore. It used to be fairly clear cut. We had none other than a few pariah states.
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden we were the darling of the West, and now
we're going back to basics.
We questionable as to our allies. Then of course we're fairly neutral in a way.
Yeah.
However, we do show. I won't go into that one. Minefield.
It is a minefield. So, I suppose a tricky question. Would you, if you were in charge of these companies, would you sell arms to Russia?
No. Because facts are facts.
Yeah.
Russia invaded another country.
Yeah.
And the thing that fascinates me is that everyone says, but the Russians supported us during the struggle. However, the Russians didn't. That was the Soviet Union. And a lot of the stuff that they got came from Ukraine and Georgia in the south. So I am not sure, because Russia is not an important trading partner. I don't see any advantage whatsoever
in cozying up to them.
And just looking at this latest prisoner exchange, I wouldn't trust Russian judicial system or Russian logic very, very far. Sorry, I've got some very good Russian friends.
Yeah. Precisely. Yeah, you got to be careful when you're dealing with those guys. And any funny stories, learning experiences along the way?
A lot of learning experiences. I just know that I could never have had another career, because the Navy is fun, but it's serious fun. You do your job, you have a wonderful camaraderie. We also have some scary moments, very scary moments, when I first got command of my second strike craft, or the one which I commissioned from the building yard on, Oswald Pirro, later Arne Söderlund. Shortly after we commissioned, in fact within less than a month after commissioning, we were called away to rescue a yacht under extreme circumstances, a yacht called the Glencairn. And there was a massive storm and she'd been dismasted. What is interesting is we had the exercises we were doing in Durban. We had a frigate and a Shackleton. And when I was called and told to rush to the aid in this yacht, the Shackleton went and did it on top, flew over and found it for me because the seas were really getting bad. And we rushed, we actually were able to come at fairly full speed. And we got to it just before dark. And we sent a boat across to go and assess the damage. We found the boat itself, the Glencairn, to be perfect condition, dismasted, with 6 people on board. So it was agreed we'd tow her. During the night, the seas, I used the word, blew up. The wind just ripped them up. And we were talking of 15 to 20 meter swells. We twice tow parted. The one time she actually surfed down and bumped against us. And it was actually quite a nasty experience. We couldn't turn very easily in the waves, because when we tow broke, we couldn't turn, because if we broached on, we could have capsized. A Mauritian trader sank, rolled over, capsized and sank, about 120 miles from us. Helicopters went and picked the people off, and they came to try and take the people off of our yacht. They couldn't, because of the play in the waves. They just couldn't lower anybody. But it was the one time in which I really thought I was about to lose the ship. And there was a kind of funny story, you might not be able to use it. But after this particular operation, we got back to harbour. In fact, eventually we couldn't tow her anymore. We had to bring in a smaller ship. We were just too powerful. A Kiswach. When we got back, the SATV came down to interview, and I was given permission to be interviewed. And I can't think of the name of a very well-known person at the time. And he put it to me. He said, Captain, I was a lieutenant commander, but my post was captain. I believe you spent 16 hours on the bridge without going between decks. So I said, yes, I think so. He said, that was very brave of you. I said, nope, I was too shit scared to go between decks. And the word cut had meaning for the first time. I had to rephrase that. But I'm quite serious. I wasn't going between decks in those seas. Just and just by coincidence, there were 6 members on board. That particular ship, later called Arne Söderlund, had 2 more rescues of yachts. And on the third one of the chap, whose name is Joel someone, climbed on board and said, which strike craft is this? And they said, it's boat 6. He says, good God. He'd been on the first rescue. Small world.
Sure. How big was that ship?
It was a yacht.
That you were using for the rescues.
Strike craft.
So
very
not big at all.
Very small strike craft.
100 feet or bigger?
No, she's bigger. 60 meters.
60. Okay, so it's a decent size.
In waves like that, it wasn't.
See, it feels like a cork.
Yeah. No, we were at stages. We were going over. We were cresting a wave. I had to stop the engines. We had 4 engines. You had to stop them because they'd run. They'd accelerate.
You'd be going too fast by the time.
Turning was also another thing. You had to turn. I always had one other officer with me, and we watched. And when we both agreed, we'd stop engines, push others full ahead, and wheel over to turn, because broaching is the worst thing that could happen to you.
Yeah.
Is if you broach.
And presumably that you're between Durban and Mauritius at this stage.
Yeah. There's a book written on it. I've got the book here. It was called the Tea Race, or I can't remember the name of it. It's a book which shows the pictures of the weather. It's the worst weather they've had for years. 5 of my ship's company got medals.
Sure. And speaking of weather, have you seen people often talk about the weather changes? Have you seen any dramatic changes over the years, or was that just a press release?
I'm most in the Navy, weather plays a fairly big part in your going to sea. And when I was in command of Fleur, my first command, we used to work around in the bay here, and people would say, "Have you seen the weather?" I'd say, "Nope." I said, "But you're going to sea tomorrow and you haven't checked the weather." I said, "No." "What happens if it's bad?" I said, "Every time the ship goes to sea, I'm prepared for the worst, but I hope for the best."
Yeah.
And I have never, because I'm pretty sure if it's going to be a cyclone or something, we'll have sufficient warning of that. But for normal weather, I take it as it comes.
That's a good metaphor for life.
Well, I hope so.
And your writing career, how did that develop?
I never was a writer. I was too busy with my job, etc. But during my staff courses, we had a project. You had to write a paper. And on both courses, in retrospect, I realized now I got a special prize for them. But I tried to think how it started. I remember. I was always interested in Navy news and reading stuff, and I was put on the editorial commission for Navy News, the Navy magazine. And so I was regularly in contact with them, and I used to go through and proofread, etc. And after I retired in 2007, I retired in 2006, I got called up and they asked me if I would take over the editor of Navy News. And I said, okay, and they gave me a date. I knew the editor. She'd been a friend I'd known her for years. So I reported to Navy News on the Monday morning, and I said, "Where's Dell? Where's the editor?" And they said, "No, she left on Friday." I presume she had another job. So we took over, and I became the editor of Navy News. And for 2 years I ran Navy News. Then after that I was asked to write a book on the South African Navy. It is a book which they wanted to present to the then president on a Fleet Review. And so I wrote that book. It's called South Africa's Navy. I've got a copy over there. And that became very popular. The Navy ordered a lot. It's a very limited edition, unfortunately. And then I was tasked to write a biography of the retiring Chief of the Navy, who was a great friend of mine and a brilliant man, Johan de Tiff. And the caveat was he was not to know, it was to be a special present to him. In fact, this was before the Navy book. I just realized that now. So I had to find out all about him. I had to interview his wife and his mother. And it was quite a long thing. But I eventually was able to, and he was presented with a book, and that became the reason why I got further interest. And it just became natural. So I enjoy writing. I edit a daily newsletter. I edit a monthly newsletter.
You used to keep notes of all these interesting stories as you went through your career, and then, or was this all from memory?
My children have asked me to write my story of my life, which is all in my mind, I believe, somewhere, maybe. But when I finished with the Submarine Museum and a few other projects, I also am proofreader for Naval Heritage Trust, their digests. So when I get a break, I will start writing the story of my life.
And you're still involved with the Navy in some other capacity?
It's not directly, other than I'm a member of a trustee of the Naval Heritage Trust. And there's an agreement between the Navy and the Heritage Trust that we will preserve and operate as a museum the submarine Johanna van der Merwe, now called Assegai. And we're working very closely together because it will be part of the Naval Museum. So we're working with the dockyard and the Navy very closely. So, and also living in Simonstown, I'm a member of the Historical Society. So I'm involved in naval matters. I'm a friend of the museum. So yes, I'm involved, but not directly. And I don't represent them in any way, other than to say that they've been so helpful and with the Submarine Museum, and it's going to be of great benefit to both them because it promotes the Navy, and to the town because it promotes tourism. It's the only submarine museum in Africa, or will be again, and there are only 6 in the Southern Hemisphere.
And will that be situated near the museum, I'd imagine?
It's an annex of the Naval Museum, and it will have more there than just the submarine eventually. We're looking at 1 or 2 other vessels, smaller vessels. But its access is right next to the NSRI, Coal Point. There's a gate, so the public in the past, when we operated it as a museum from 210 to 215, people had to get into the dockyard, which was with security, escorts. It became a pain.
Yeah.
Now it's a gate to the visit. And the submarine's ashore now, which means that access is very easy. We're just busy cutting it at the moment.
And it was quite a job getting it through some of those tight areas of the dockyard, wasn't it?
It was extremely. We had to turn 90 degrees in one position to take her straight in. And what looked like a 3-point turn, turns out that the equipment used could not turn its wheels unless it was moving because of the weight, 680 tons of submarine. Granted, it was 174 wheels, but it still put a lot of pressure on. So when we thought you get there, you turn the wheels and move like that, we had to move her. She had to get motion before the wheels would turn. So it took over 30 points. It took us 6 hours to turn her through 90 degrees. But removal of a lamppost or 2, peacefully, not with the submarine.
Yeah.
We took her down to let her get past. And a bit of walling, we got her in.
That'll be great for youngsters to be able to look at that.
It's our primary, okay, we're preserving the submarine for heritage purposes, but our primary thing is to influence the youth, preteen youth, as to the importance of maths and science. The submarine, if you, being a man involved in the shipping world, there is no system that has more subsystems of technology than a submarine. People forget a submarine flies, not in the air, but in the water. So every control mechanism that the aircraft has, a submarine has to have. It's a bit more difficult down underwater as well because you can't get water in. It's got to be, so it's got hydraulics, it's got optics, it's got sonics, it's got every technology available to man, mechanical and electronic, is down there. Somebody said to me, but EW, which is electronic spectrum and radios, etc. Yes, we come to the surface as well. So it's everything. So the plan now is we'll have exhibits in a display area, which will possibly eventually start showing them the theory behind everything, so kids can see it and then go and see the practical, or just visit the museum and savor the practical value of it.
Do you get any cadets coming from the Naval College by Murdoch Valley?
Samtra.
Yeah.
No, there's Law Hill House.
Yeah, Law Hill, that one.
When we ran previously, yes, we used to invite them across there, and we will probably do the same again. But we're not going to influence them because they're already influenced. They've already chosen a career.
Yeah, so that's preaching to the choir almost.
Well, yeah, but they will still get value because very few people have been on a submarine.
Yeah.
How many submarines have you been on?
9.
9, okay. You're in the field, but the average person, it's a massive opportunity to see a submarine. They read about them, they see them in the movies, and to actually be in one. So, yes, they will definitely be part of our. We are looking to subsidize visits for schools. We've got a number of organizations have said they will subsidize or provide funding to cover the costs of visits. You've got to bear in mind the submarine has to generate its own funding to maintain itself.
Yeah.
And we've got to have some staff, but it's going to be minimal. The major portion of staff will be volunteers. So unfortunately, we've got to be commercial, but non-profit. And any money that gets made is ring-fenced. And this is now part of the agreement with the Navy. And there's a board of their Navy members and us which controls all expenditure. So the money cannot be used for anything other than 1 or 2 permanent staff and the running of the submarine and the maintenance.
And the rest goes back into the museum, you'd imagine?
The rest goes into the maintenance of the submarine. We could use the facilities there as well, because we've got to upgrade the facilities. We're currently busy upgrading at the moment.
That could be a massive attraction for the area.
I think it is. It's going to make a big difference to tourism. Currently, people forget that Simonstown is a waypoint on what is possibly the biggest tourist route in the country. I don't know if you're aware of it, but the Penguin Colony recorded over 1 million visitors in a year.
Another million went to Cape Point.
A little bit less in a way, funny enough.
Oh, less to Cape Point?
It's slightly less, yeah.
Oh.
I think they've 800,000 or something. I'm just from what I've heard. We want to turn Simonstown into a destination more than just a waypoint. I'm also involved in Statco, which is a Simonstown Amenities Development Company, and we operate Jubilee Square and the town jetty on behalf of the city. Now, during COVID, the tourist office in Simonstown closed down. They all did. They had a little portable trailer on the jetty for a while afterwards, but it just died away. And it turns out that most of the city's tourist offices are closed. Statco, therefore, opened our own tourism information centre because people come to her on the central and come in and say, where do I find this, etc. And we've now become probably the only tourist office, regional tourist office in town. And the number of people who comment on it, and in fact, if you ever go to Statco, go into the office, you'll see a map showing where all the tourists have come from. So we are involved in a small way in supporting the tourism industry. Now with the submarine next to us, it's going to take off.
You must have known the area's changed a lot. A lot of foreigners buying property here in the last couple of years.
They've always, funny enough, we've always had the swallows. Very important part, people who move between the two. In fact, some are South Africans who have houses overseas as well. But we've got them. But the big influx now are people coming from the Gauteng, coming down here. Mainly older, more senior members. But I think they're more important down here because this is a community which lends itself to things such as a book festival. And we've just recently had our second book festival. And there's a lot of talent down here, and Simonstown is going to become a bit of a tourist mecca in a way. It's sad for some of us because we remember Simonstown.
The little Sleepy Hollow.
It was a happy Sleepy Hollow.
Yeah, exactly.
When I joined Simonstown, it was still a mixed town. It reverberated. We still had a frigate, British frigate on squadron. There were 6 big hotels, some with 2 pubs on the main road. The town just seemed alive. It has died over the years. I don't want it to become a tourist mecca, but I think a lot of tourists coming through will be good for everybody.
So the Navy, well, I guess change is inevitable. When the British left, that was almost the signaling of the changing of the tides for Simonstown.
Well, look, the British left in 1957 in a way, but they kept a frigate. down here, not necessarily on station. So she was deployed here, so the people's families didn't come down and join them down here as they did in the old days. But there was a frigate based, sort of stationed in Simonstown, which used to go across to South America. It travelled a lot, and they were the Cat class. The Puma, Jaguar, Lynx and Leopard. And in fact, I remember visiting them and getting souvenirs from them. I've got all their badges. And so in 67, they withdrew. In 67, the hotel industry came up with the star system, so our hotels closed. And in 67, group areas. And that was painful. I mean, for some of us, for example, the Navy tailor was Mr. Manuel. Now, Mr. Manuel, in those days you couldn't buy off the shelf rank insignia. He had to make it for you. And Mr. Manuel's shop in the main road, sartorial house, every officer was in Mr. Manuel's debt almost, because he would make your uniforms. And he was one of the people that had to move out. And that killed a lot of the, I mean, you felt guilty when going in, very guilty. So 67 was a bad year for Simonstown. Look, the removals went on for years, but they didn't all just move at once. But it didn't make it any better.
Yeah. As you say, it must have been a painful time for the area.
It was. There were some families, I can't think, the Nashis and a few others, who hung on. They were able to. I just know that they lived in their buildings as well. And I ended up as a neighbour to the Nashis in a way. And their daughters and my daughters went to Girl Guides together. I often wondered how, if everyone had stayed, how nice this town would have been.
Hearing it was very vibrant and a cosmopolitan sort of place before that.
Cosmopolitan, I haven't thought of that in that term. I just know it was, I remember children playing in the streets.
Yeah, exactly.
You could hear them.
So was it difficult in serving for the government when you could see the way things were going with their choices, or was the Navy kind of separate from that?
I was too young to think, but I did come from a rather interesting family. My father got fired from the Defence Force and from his job in 1960 after Sharpeville. Let's put it this way, we were a politically liberal family, in a way. But it was very sad, but when you're 18 years, 19 years old, 20 years old, you don't dwell too much on things that don't affect you, I think, sadly.
Exactly. But it all came full circle then in '94 when things opened up again.
Things opened up before '94. They started opening up, you could feel it.
But maybe '92 when Mandela was released.
'93 the first British ship was back here, HMS Norfolk. Things changed, but unfortunately they went a full circle, which means you go up, 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 then you go down again. And we haven't seen visiting ships here for some time.
Any reason for that?
Yeah, there are a few reasons. I think our policy towards international relations, etc., is putting us in a bind that people don't want to come here. The main reason is very simple, and we watched it with the recent visit by the Japanese training squadron. Coming into Simonstown, if they could, would be nice for us. But how would the people get anywhere? You'd have nothing but buses trying to get them from here.
Yeah.
A 1-hour trip through to Cape Town. Whereas berthing at the cruise terminal next to the V&A, which would you choose if you were a sailor for 3 days?
I would have chosen
It's so much easier going to Cape Town than having to come into Simonstown and schlep your way ashore. We couldn't cater for, I estimate there were about 580 just under 600 people on those two ships.
Yeah.
We couldn't have absorbed them. And the railways, metro, was out anyway due to rail damage, and they're coming back. I'm looking forward to them coming back properly, but they're still not there.
Seems to be slowly making a return.
I'm watching, the sand on the rail means that for up to a year we don't have a train.
In your day, that never stopped any train.
No, I was about to say. I don't remember the trains ever not running.
Yeah.
It doesn't require a rocket scientist to work out their problems.
Yeah.
First of all, there was a wall which has now been damaged. Secondly, two guys with a spade and a wheelbarrow doing it every day is a lot better than having to wait until you require a front-end loader.
Exactly.
Now we've got front-end loaders sitting here for a long time, but they don't use it until there's enough sand. And by the time there's enough sand, there's no trains. So it's a...
It's job creation waiting to happen.
One of the things, I'm going to tell you something personally. I worked out that I could never have had any other career than the Navy. Never. Because the Navy never keeps you in one place for longer than a few years, or it shouldn't. And if you're young, and the field I was in, you've got to do courses as well. So when there's a course, they move you anyway, so you don't go back. So I had, every time I left a ship, I got another exciting challenge, because you went up to another type of job. I mean, I worked on projects. I worked on every type of job. I went across to intelligence. I traveled. You never get bored in the Navy. But more importantly, you are picking up skills all the time. It's not necessarily a skill such as being able to weld or something like that. That's something different. But it's you can work in the international field. You can run things. You can organize. You can plan. Because the Navy requires planning. When you go to sea, if you leave something, you can't go back and get it. So everything is planned. Navy are excellent organizers of functions. They can organize anything. In fact, in 1997, the Navy celebrated its 75th anniversary. We ran a fleet review. We had 23 visiting foreign warships. We had parades in Cape Town. We had a fleet review. At that, an American admiral, talking to the then Chief of the Navy and myself, made a statement. He said, "I don't think we could have pulled it off." I said, "Sorry, sir, but the American Navy," he says, "no, we're just too big. We can't do this personal depth." It was a roaring success. The Navy can organize anything.
Can we get sounds like we almost need a bit of Navy expertise in government to streamline.
Oh, the Navy could run the
Our next president.
No, retired naval people can run it. Because you're always wiser after the fact.
Exactly.
No, it's, in all seriousness, the Navy are, if you look around town too, you'll see naval people involved in everything.
But a good work ethic as well.
We've got some examples. We've got a retired warrant officer, Harry Kroom. The whole town knows him. He fixes things. He's forever fixing things. You'll see him in his bucky with his... unbelievable. And that's the way the Navy works. They're active, they're busy. Ex-Navy.
And yeah, it must be a good social life as well with all the Navy people when you get together.
If you've got time for it.
Judging by the bar, yeah, you have a few laughs.
We're too busy. No, it's actually a working bar.
It's a working bar.
Except these things don't pump any beer. South Africa doesn't have. We have to have gas ones here.
So people can come to the museum for a drink then.
Yeah.
Working for your friends.
Some people do, and they say how much, and I say, sorry, I'm not allowed to sell, no license.
And the museum, what's the history behind that?
I've been collecting since 1956. I've built up collections. There are 400 collections here. It's open to visitors. Visits are by donation, well, voluntary donation, and as a result it's raised, I can't remember the full total, but it's over 100,000 rand for Sunflower Fund. At the moment we're raising for South African bone marrow, and we're already into 5 figures there, and it's purely by donations. Visitors come here, and there's a donation jar they put in, and when it gets to 5,000 rand, I pay it in, and so it's got a benefit. There's a good reason for that. My daughter survived leukemia at the age of 40 through bone marrow transplant, and so I'm trying to assist them as much as we can.
Absolutely. Perhaps, would it be possible to have a little tour around?
Yeah, have a quick walk through.
Perfect.
You want to do it now? Are we finished with this?
Yeah, unless there's anything else you want to add?
Well, you're the one that wants this, not me.
I suppose you get asked for interviews all the time.
It's just funny, I've had 3 this week.
It doesn't rain, it pours.
It's because of the submarine.
And I don't know if you can comment on it, but the accident with the sub last year, was that just bad timing or bad preparation?
I'm happy to comment on that because the Navy wasn't allowed to, so Cape Talk, etc. I spoke to them, and I spoke to them cold. It was submarine training in this Navy is no different to what it used to be. Technology and detail, but the quality of submariners remains the same. I mean, working with a submarine museum and working on it, and I know most of the old hands as well. The one thing about a submarine is, if you don't trust somebody on board, you'll stop volunteering. They're volunteers. So there's an equal amount of expertise there, and everyone balances each other off. And if they don't trust you, you won't last. It's simple as that. So they are capable. The main problem why we don't see a submarine at sea too often is budget. In the past we used to have stores, so if you needed something you went in and you took it off, but that means you've got stock which is sitting on a shelf doing nothing. So when it comes to savings, that's the one thing that most organizations will say, oh no, we'll buy off the shelf. Now, first of all, submarines aren't made with stuff off the shelf. So there's certain things which they have to manufacture, and it's going to be precision manufactured to very high standards. And our submarines, I think Deutsche Lloyd, are under a non-military classification society. Very few countries do that. They do their own classifications. We get professionals in Germany to clarify our submarine is seaworthy or not, etc. Training is good. In this case, the vessel was training with helicopters, etc. People said, but the weather, yes, it's all very well training to do something on a duck pond and then going out to sea. So you train when you have the opportunity and when the conditions are acceptable. And that day the conditions were acceptable. Yes, there was a swell. During the training, they had this accident. Now, people said, didn't they have safety harnesses? And I didn't know at that stage, but I said, they do have them. They probably had them, but safety harnesses have a disadvantage. And I was washed over from a strike craft at night. I had a safety harness on. I got washed off the forecastle at night. Luckily, while I was dangling there, a chap pulled me in again. But one of the problems you have with a safety harness is if you get washed off from a ship, you get washed clear. On a safety harness, you get washed and you can get battered. And secondly, if there are too many of you on the line, you could break that line too. So the circumstances are very different. That's what I said at the time. So, and in fact, that's what happened in a way. First of all, I can't remember the details, but they've got a wave recorder buoy there, and it recorded this massive wave. Now, it's not a normal wave. There was this wave out of nowhere, and no one can predict that. The Board of Inquiry isn't out yet, but all I can say is that there was nobody unprofessional that I know of there. The loss of 3 is terrible. It really was terrible. But I don't think it reflected any drop in standards or any decision that I don't think we would have taken. I don't think they would have changed in those days, in our days.
Training accidents.
It happens.
Yeah.
It's sad. Very, very sad.
Exactly.
Because we lost 3 very, very experienced submariners. Very.
I suppose once you get swept out to sea in that cold water, you don't have much time on your hands.
No, we would have had time. We've had a few cases of where people have been washed overboard. A friend of mine, Nick Foster, also became an admiral. He got washed overboard. 1 chap died in that incident. 5 were rescued by divers. In fact, I've got the bravery medal from one of them in my collections. So I haven't seen personally any drop in standards of the individuals.
So I guess not knowing the details, presumably it was so rough that you couldn't really get a rescue vehicle out there in time.
Well, it would have taken too long, but they rescued the people. Those that died, time was of the essence. You will never get anyone out there faster. Yeah. In fact, the NSRA came out very quickly.
Yeah.
But it's in those conditions. I've been through a freak wave.
Yeah.
On sweepers, in 1971, we were taken in a freak wave off of the East London coast, and we nearly broached. We were on our side by the time I got to the wheel. The chap on the wheel, because of the broaching, was hanging onto the life raft outside, the stanchion.
Sure.
And that was the closest, and a wave went over us. In fact, that was the most terrifying moment of my life.
So you're broadsided by that wave?
We went down. The captain's chair broke off. Things were broken all over.
Is that the biggest wave you've seen in your career?
I didn't see it. I felt it. I had a cigarette in my mouth.
Yeah.
I just lit a cigarette. I'd hand it over. And all of a sudden, when she went, I was at the bottom. I had 2 people on top of me. Captain and his chair came over, and the yeoman was on top of him. And I just pulled myself out, ran down below, and took the wheel. And when I was relieved, I felt something in my mouth. I'd bitten through the filter. It was in my mouth.
Yeah.
Nasty.
Serious business. Absolutely, sure.
Okay, you want to walk through?